Have you ever felt like your thoughts, emotions, and actions aren't entirely your own, as if something is subtly guiding you without you even realizing it? That nagging feeling that your choices are being influenced by something invisible, something that's not immediately apparent, yet somehow always seems to be there. What if this wasn't just a coincidence? What if there's an invisible system that controls your consciousness, shaping your perceptions, desires, and decisions without your full awareness? This idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. In fact, many ancient spiritual traditions, including those with Gnostic influences, have described such systems for centuries. In Gnosticism, there is a belief in a hidden force that operates in the background of reality, subtly controlling the minds of individuals, trapping them in cycles of distraction, ego, and disconnection from true awareness. They often call this the Archons, but it can also be understood as the conditioning of the mind through societal, psychological, and biological filters. What you were never told is that this system is not just something external to you, it's internal, woven deeply into the fabric of your consciousness. From the moment you were born, your brain began absorbing information and conditioning itself to fit into the world, slowly shaping your awareness, limiting what you can perceive, and guiding your behavior in ways you might not even be aware of. This system shapes what you value, how you react, and ultimately, what you believe is real. In this video, we're going to uncover the invisible system that shapes your consciousness by exploring three main layers: the biological layer, the psychological layer, and the social or environmental layer. These three layers work together to form an almost invisible system that shapes how you experience the world. And the strange truth is that the more you understand how this system works, the more you can start to see it, understand it, and eventually loosen its grip on your life. If you've ever wondered why your thoughts feel so reactive, why you can't break free from certain habits or emotional patterns, or why you feel like your choices are more influenced by external forces than you'd like to admit, this video is for you. And if you're ready to dive deep into how the invisible system works and how you can start to break free from it, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because this isn't just about understanding these layers, it's about changing your relationship to them, step by step. Let's begin by acknowledging the first layer, the biological system that plays a crucial role in shaping our consciousness. It's not just your brain, it's your nervous system, your hormones, and your instincts, all of which are constantly feeding your perception of the world. And this system is the most fundamental, because it acts on an unconscious level, affecting how we see ourselves and the world, often without us even realizing it. The first part of the invisible system is the one you almost never notice, because it doesn't speak in sentences, it speaks in sensations, impulses, and reflexes, and that is your biology, the nervous system that decides what feels safe, what feels threatening, what feels urgent, and what feels rewarding, long before your logical mind even gets a vote. Your brain is not built to show you reality as it is, it's built to help you survive inside reality, which means it filters, simplifies, and prioritizes constantly, because if you were aware of everything at once, every sound, every tiny movement, every feeling in your body, every possible meaning, you would freeze, so your brain chooses a narrow spotlight and calls it, my experience. And here's what makes it feel like control: the spotlight is biased, because it leans toward threat and reward, and that bias is ancient, because your ancestors who noticed danger faster survived more often, and the ones who chased rewards effectively reproduced more often, so your nervous system developed like a guard dog and a hunger engine at the same time, scanning for what could hurt you and what could satisfy you. This is why your consciousness can feel pulled without your permission, because you can be having a normal day and suddenly one comment, one facial expression, one memory, one headline, one image, can hijack your attention and flood your body with stress or desire, and once the body is flooded, your thoughts start reorganizing around the flood, trying to justify it, explain it, or solve it, which is how a biological reaction turns into a mental reality. So the invisible system begins with chemistry, cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine, and the whole web of signals that tell you, pay attention to this, and when those signals are triggered, your consciousness narrows, because in survival mode you don't contemplate the universe, you focus on what feels immediate, and the world becomes smaller, faster, and more polarized. To make this simple, imagine a phone that switches to low power mode when the battery drops, because it shuts down background functions to preserve what matters, And in the same way, when your nervous system feels threatened, it switches you into a kind of psychological low-power mode, where nuance disappears, patience shrinks, and your awareness becomes tunnel vision. And if you live in that mode too often, you start believing tunnel vision is just who you are. That's why the system is so effective, because it doesn't need to convince you with arguments, it only needs to keep your body tense and your attention captured, since a tense body produces a narrow mind, and a narrow mind is easier to steer toward fear, toward craving, toward comparison, and toward quick judgments. And here's the quiet trap: once you spend years in this pattern, you stop noticing it as a pattern, because it becomes your normal, and then anything that would widen consciousness, like silence, stillness, or inner observation, can feel uncomfortable, even threatening, not because it's bad, but because it's unfamiliar, and the nervous system often confuses unfamiliar with unsafe. So the biological layer of the invisible system is basically this: it trains your consciousness to prioritize survival and reward, and it does that through automatic reactions that happen faster than thought. Now the next layer is where it gets even more personal, because once biology creates the spotlight, your identity steps in and teaches that spotlight what it should care about most. Which means your story, your role, your fears, your pride, and your need for approval, and that identity layer is where control becomes psychological. Once the biological system has filtered your reality to prioritize survival, the psychological system steps in, and this layer is where the invisible system begins to feel like your self. Your identity, your story of who you are and what matters to you, takes over and narrows your consciousness even further. Identity is powerful because it's the lens through which you interpret everything. It's the meaning-making machine that decides what's important and what's irrelevant. From an early age, your mind starts gathering experiences, emotions, and feedback to build an image of me. The brain doesn't just absorb information, it filters that information through the lens of identity. Who am I? What am I supposed to be? What do I need to be safe and accepted? These questions guide how you pay attention, what you believe about yourself, and what you perceive as true. For example, if you identify as a hard worker, your brain will filter the world in a way that highlights and rewards hard work. You'll notice stories, opportunities, and people who reinforce that identity, while the things that don't align with your self-image fade into the background. The more you identify with that hard worker role, the more your brain narrows your perception of yourself and the world around you to fit that image. This becomes even more powerful when you feel threatened. Let's say you get rejected or criticized in some way. If your identity is tied to being perfect or always successful, the rejection or criticism feels like a direct assault on your entire self-concept. That triggers your body's survival mechanisms, and your attention narrows further. You become fixated on proving yourself, defending your self-worth, and avoiding any further criticism. Your sense of self becomes wrapped up in what others think of you, and you lose touch with the broader perspective that sees you as part of something bigger. This is where the psychological system creates a kind of internal filter that makes you react to the world instead of responding with awareness. When you're reactive, you're constantly trying to protect the identity you've built, which can lead to a narrowing of your attention. It's almost like you're locked into a loop of defending and proving the version of yourself you've created, which limits your capacity to see the larger picture. The more you identify with specific roles, whether it's as a parent, an employee, a partner, a spiritual seeker, the more you limit the amount of reality you can experience. Each of these identities comes with a set of rules: what you should do, how you should behave, and what you should want. But the problem is that these rules can create blind spots. They tell you to pay attention to certain things and ignore others, and in doing so, you miss out on the fullness of the present moment. This is why many spiritual teachings talk about letting go of the ego or dissolving the self. It's not about denying who you are, but about recognizing that you are not just your identity. You are not the roles you play, the thoughts you think, or the stories you tell yourself about who you are. True spiritual awakening often comes when you realize you are much more than any label you attach to yourself. You start to see beyond the filter of your identity and reconnect with the awareness beneath it. So, the psychological system is like a second filter. Once your nervous system has shaped your attention for survival, your identity narrows it even further by giving it rules and labels. And the more tightly you hold on to those labels, the more the feeling of separation from something greater becomes real, because your identity confines you to a small, fixed version of who you are. Now, let's look at how the external world plays a massive role in reinforcing this psychological system, making it seem like separation from the divine is the only reality. This is where the environmental layer comes into play. Once your biological and psychological systems have shaped your perception, the environmental layer plays a huge role in reinforcing the sense of separation from the divine. This external world, comprising everything from your culture, society, media, education, and even the daily interactions you have, constantly pulls your attention towards certain beliefs, behaviors, and values. Over time, it reinforces a view of reality that feels disconnected from something greater than yourself. The environment doesn't just influence you, it conditions your mind, pushing your attention to focus on external validation, social comparison, and material success. In modern society, this manifests as the pressure to conform to external standards, whether it's through wealth, appearance, achievements, or social status. These external pressures create a world where success is defined by what you do, not who you are, and this reinforces the idea of separation. Think about how much of your day is spent responding to external inputs. Whether it's checking your phone, scrolling through social media, reading the news, or having conversations with others, so much of your attention is pulled outward. The world tells you that you are what you have, what you achieve, and how others perceive you. This constant external focus pulls you further from your inner connection, from that deeper, spiritual awareness that is inherently unified with the divine. This social conditioning keeps you in a state of reaction rather than awareness. It encourages you to focus on doing rather than being. When you live in a world that constantly tells you what's important, whether it's following trends, seeking approval, or chasing material gain, you lose touch with your deeper connection to something beyond the material world. Additionally, we live in a world where urgency is constant. From the pressure to meet deadlines to the urgency of needing instant gratification, society pushes you to stay in a state of heightened awareness, but only on surface-level tasks. The constant state of busyness makes it hard to sit still and reconnect with your true self or God. When you are constantly moving, achieving, and reacting to the demands of the world, it's easy to feel disconnected from the spiritual essence that underlies everything. Culturally, we are also taught to value individuality and competition, creating an environment where separation feels even more pronounced. You are often taught to define yourself by how you compare to others, which makes you feel like you're competing for limited resources like approval, success, and love. This competitive mindset reinforces the sense that you are separate from others, and in turn, separate from the divine, because true spiritual unity transcends comparison and competition. The environmental layer also includes media and technology, which can be incredibly powerful in shaping how you perceive yourself and the world. Constant bombardment by advertisements, social media feeds, and news cycles pulls you away from quiet contemplation and into the shallow waters of distraction and comparison. These distractions keep you focused on the external world, what's trending, what's popular, what's new, instead of allowing space for you to connect with something deeper. So, the environmental system continually reinforces the feeling of separation because it trains your attention to stay external, constantly measuring yourself against external standards and competing for limited resources. The more you focus on this external feedback loop, the less you feel connected to something greater, and the more you experience the world as separate from the divine. But here's the key: you are not powerless in the face of these external forces. The moment you become aware of how much your environment influences you, you can begin to choose how to respond. By consciously redirecting your attention, setting boundaries, and practicing mindfulness, you can start to shift away from the external pull and return to a deeper sense of inner connection. The next step is to explore how we can break free from this invisible system and begin to reconnect with the divine, starting with the most practical way to loosen the grip of biological, psychological, and environmental forces that perpetuate this feeling of separation. Now that you can see the three layers working together, biology narrowing your attention through survival signals, identity narrowing it through roles and self-protection, and the environment reinforcing the whole loop through urgency and comparison, the next question is the only one that really matters: How do you loosen the grip of this invisible system without becoming paranoid, without trying to escape the world, and without replacing one control structure with another? The first move is simply learning to spot the moment the system takes the wheel, because control rarely arrives like a loud announcement, it arrives like a subtle shift. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing shortens, your mind starts racing, and suddenly your awareness collapses into a tunnel where only threat, approval, and immediate relief seem real, and if you can catch that shift early, you can interrupt the whole chain before it becomes your mood for the next 6 hours. A practical way to do that is to treat your body like an alarm system you can actually read, because the invisible system often speaks through the body first, and when you notice tension rising, you don't need to interpret it as destiny, you can treat it as a signal that your attention is being hijacked, and then you create a tiny pause, not a dramatic meditation session, just a few slower breaths that tell the nervous system, I'm not in immediate danger, because when the body softens even slightly, the mind regains nuance, and nuance is where freedom begins. The second move is to reduce the system's favorite food, which is compulsive attention, because if the environment is constantly trying to pull your focus outward, then every time you practice choosing your attention instead of donating it automatically, you weaken the grip, and you can start small, like deciding that you won't check your phone during the first 10 minutes after waking up, or that you'll take one walk a day without audio playing in your ears, because silence is uncomfortable. Only when you've been trained to need stimulation as a shield. The third move is to separate your identity from your reactions, because the invisible system becomes far more powerful when you believe your emotions define you, so when anger shows up, you don't say, I am anger, you say, anger is here, and that one small language shift matters because it creates distance, and distance creates choice, and choice is the opposite of being controlled. The fourth move is to rebuild what the old traditions would call inner verification, meaning you stop outsourcing truth to whatever voice sounds most certain, whether that voice is a guru, a trend, a political tribe, or even your own anxious thoughts, and instead you ask a simple question that keeps you sane, does this make me more awake, more honest, and more free inside, or does it make me more reactive and dependent? Because a teaching that increases fear and dependency is often just another layer of the same system wearing spiritual clothing. And the fifth move is to remember that the goal is not to fight the world, the goal is to change your relationship with it, because the invisible system thrives when you either obey it unconsciously or rebel against it obsessively, while real freedom looks calmer than both. It looks like participating in life while refusing to let life own your attention completely. Once you apply these moves consistently, you'll notice something surprising. The system doesn't always disappear, but it becomes visible, and what becomes visible becomes negotiable, and that shift is exactly where a person stops being dragged and starts choosing, not perfectly, not forever, but more often than before. At this stage, once you've learned how to spot the system and loosen its grip in small daily moments, the next thing to understand is what the system is actually trying to protect, because control isn't random, it has a purpose, and the purpose is to keep consciousness in a narrow, predictable range where it stays useful to the machine of survival, status, and repetition. In plain terms, the invisible system doesn't need to make you miserable all the time, it only needs to keep you busy enough and reactive enough that you never settle into the deeper kind of awareness where you start asking questions it can't easily answer, questions like why you crave approval so strongly, why fear can drive your decisions even when you know better, and why your mind keeps returning to the same loops even after you promise yourself you'll change. So the system protects itself by protecting your automatic habits, because habits are cheap control, and once a habit is installed, the system doesn't need to fight you, it just waits for the trigger, and then the habit runs like a program, and the person calls it personality. That's why the biggest battlefield is attention, because attention decides what becomes real for you, and when your attention is trained to lock onto threat, comparison, and stimulation, the deeper dimensions of life don't stop existing, they just become invisible. Like stars in daylight, and this is exactly how a subtle control system works, because it doesn't need to destroy truth, it only needs to keep you too distracted to notice it. This is also where the Gnostic lens becomes useful without turning paranoid, because Gnostic texts often describe rulers of a system, not as creatures you must fear, but as patterns that maintain a certain order, and the order they maintain is an order where the soul forgets its depth, where people live as if the surface is the whole, where identity becomes a cage, and where the highest form of freedom, inner clarity, is replaced by endless management of emotion and image. So ask yourself what the system encourages you to do every day, because the answer is usually simple. It encourages you to chase, to prove, to compare, to hurry, and to distract yourself the moment you feel anything uncomfortable, and if you do those 5 things consistently, your consciousness stays narrow by default, and a narrow consciousness is easier to steer through fear and reward. Now, here's the part that gives you real leverage. The system is strongest when you believe it is invisible, because if you don't see the mechanism, you experience the results as, just who I am, yet the moment you see the mechanism, you stop treating it like fate, and you start treating it like conditioning, and conditioning can be unlearned. So in this step, the goal is to learn one more practical skill, noticing the difference between a genuine inner signal and a system trigger, because not every impulse is wisdom, and not every fear is guidance, and once you can tell the difference, your freedom increases fast, because you stop obeying the loudest feeling as if it were the truest feeling. A simple way to tell the difference is this: system triggers feel urgent, tight, and polarizing, like, do it now, you're in danger, you must prove, you must win, while genuine inner signals feel steadier, clearer, and less dramatic, like they give you direction without squeezing your chest, and once you learn to trust that steadiness, the system loses one of its main tricks, which is using intensity to impersonate truth. And now we're ready for a very personal step, because once you understand the mechanism, you'll start recognizing which part of the system hooks you the strongest, whether it's fear, approval, comparison, distraction, or the need to control, and naming your main hook is the fastest way to weaken it. At this point, once you start seeing the invisible system for what it is, the next crucial step is identifying which hook is the strongest for you. This is deeply personal because everyone is triggered differently by the system. Some people are more vulnerable to fear, others to the need for approval, some may fall into constant comparison, and others get hooked by distraction or the need to control. Recognizing your main hook is incredibly powerful because it helps you spot when the system is running your life, rather than you living from a place of conscious awareness. The tricky part is that these hooks often disguise themselves as normal feelings, desires, or behaviors. Fear might feel like a warning sign, craving might feel like a legitimate desire, and the need to compare might seem like a natural way of finding your place in the world. But once you start to recognize them, you begin to see how much of your energy has been spent reacting to these hooks instead of acting from a grounded, authentic space. Here's how you can identify your main hook. 1. Look at your emotional triggers. What emotions do you react to most strongly? Is it fear, perhaps a fear of failure or not being good enough? Or is it shame, a desire to hide parts of yourself to avoid being judged? Maybe it's anxiety, always feeling like there's something you need to do or prove. The emotion that causes the most reactivity in your life is often a sign that you've been hooked by that aspect of the system. 2. Pay attention to what keeps you distracted. Another big hook is distraction. The system rewards constant activity and input, from social media to news to entertainment. Notice when you're reaching for something just to fill the space, whether it's checking your phone when you feel uncomfortable or turning on the TV to avoid silence. This need for distraction is often a sign that the system is diverting your attention away from deeper, uncomfortable truths. 3. Check how often you compare yourself to others. If you find yourself constantly measuring your success, appearance, or life against others, the hook of comparison is at play. The system loves comparison because it feeds on competition and the need to be seen as better than or equal to others. Comparison keeps you trapped in a cycle of external validation, making you feel like you're separate from others, and from the divine, unless you're winning or succeeding. 4. Examine your need for control. If you are constantly trying to control your environment or the people around you to feel secure, this is a hook that the system loves. The illusion of control provides a false sense of safety, but in truth, it keeps you disconnected from the flow of life and the presence of the divine. When you feel like you need to manage everything to be okay, you've been caught by the control hook. 5. Look for the patterns that show up again and again. Your main hook doesn't just show up once, it repeats. So take note of the recurring patterns in your life. If you keep attracting the same situations, relationships, or emotional states, it's a sign that this hook is running in the background. These patterns are often deeply embedded in your psychology, and they're created and reinforced by the invisible system. Once you identify your main hook, the next step is to not fight it, because fighting will only reinforce its power. Instead, start to notice it without judgment. When you recognize your hook, you create a little space between it and your reaction. For example, if you feel fear rising, instead of immediately reacting with panic, pause, take a breath, and observe the fear. Don't try to push it away or suppress it. Just acknowledge, fear is here, and allow it to exist without it controlling you. This is the key to loosening the grip of the system, awareness. When you are aware of the hook, it loses its power. It's no longer running you in the background like an invisible program. You become the observer, the conscious creator of your experience, and this is the moment where real freedom begins to unfold. Now that you've identified your main hook, the next step is to learn how to navigate the system without being controlled by it, how to live in the world, interact with the environment, but still maintain your inner connection to the divine. Once you've identified your main hook, the next step is learning how to navigate the system without being controlled by it. It's not about escaping the world or cutting yourself off from society, it's about understanding the invisible forces at play and choosing how to respond rather than react. The first thing to understand is that awareness is the key. When you start noticing the patterns that hook you, whether it's fear, comparison, control, or distraction, you gain the power to choose your response. This doesn't mean the hook goes away immediately, but once you recognize it, you can begin to intervene in a way that breaks its automatic control over you. The power of this practice is in the moment of awareness itself. When you see the hook, you are no longer its victim. One powerful way to do this is through mindful detachment. This means observing your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors without immediately identifying with them. For example, if you feel yourself being pulled into comparison, you might notice the thought, "I am not enough unless I am better than others," and instead of diving into that thought and reacting emotionally, you pause and remind yourself, "This is a thought I am having, but it is not who I am." This simple act of detachment allows you to keep your attention on the bigger picture, which is your deeper connection to God and the divine. The second practice is to reclaim your attention by becoming more intentional about where you direct it. The system thrives when your attention is constantly fragmented and distracted, but by choosing where to focus, you gain back control. This doesn't mean blocking out the world or pretending the distractions don't exist. It means you actively choose when to engage with them and when to step back and redirect your attention to something deeper. For example, when you feel the pull to scroll endlessly through your phone, ask yourself, "Is this serving me? Is this connecting me with what is true and real?" If it's not, take a moment to center yourself and choose something that nourishes your awareness. The third practice is embodying stillness in your daily life. The system is designed to keep you in constant motion, so finding moments of stillness is essential to reconnecting with your divine nature. This can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths throughout the day, walking in nature without distractions, or sitting in silence for a few minutes before bed. When you allow yourself to just be without doing, you make space for your deeper connection with God. It's in these moments of stillness that the noise of the world fades and you remember that you are not separate, but whole. The fourth practice is disconnecting from the narrative of not enough. One of the main hooks the system uses is the story of inadequacy, the feeling that you are always lacking, always needing to do more, be more, achieve more. This narrative keeps you trapped in a cycle of striving and chasing external validation. The key to breaking free is learning to live from the place of sufficiency, where you no longer define yourself by your achievements or social status. You are enough simply because you exist, because you are part of the divine. Practicing self-compassion and affirming your worth outside of external accomplishments helps loosen the grip of this system. The fifth practice is to reconnect with your inner guidance. Beyond the noise of the world and the stories your mind tells you, there is an inner wisdom that connects you directly to the divine. This inner wisdom is often quiet, subtle, and requires you to trust it over external validation. It may come in the form of intuition, a gut feeling, or a deep sense of knowing. The more you practice listening to this inner voice, the more you tune into a truth that exists beyond the system's influence. You'll find that your decisions become more aligned with your true purpose, and the divine connection feels more real and accessible. By weaving these practices into your daily life, you slowly begin to break the cycle of reaction and control, moving toward a place of more conscious participation in the world. The invisible system will still be there, but you will no longer be controlled by it. You will begin to live freely within it, choosing what deserves your attention and energy, and reconnecting with the divine presence that exists beyond the veil. In the next step, we will explore how to sustain this deeper connection over time, so you can create lasting change in how you experience your relationship with the world and the divine. The key is to keep returning to the practices, with patience and gentleness, because freedom doesn't happen overnight, it happens gradually, as you integrate these shifts into your life. Sustaining a deeper connection to the divine, and maintaining the awareness that allows you to navigate the invisible system, requires consistency and a willingness to practice patience with yourself. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that spiritual progress should happen in big, dramatic moments, but the truth is that spiritual growth is a slow unfolding, a gradual return to awareness, moment by moment. One of the most important aspects of sustaining your connection is daily practice. This doesn't mean you have to spend hours in meditation or retreat, although that can help, but it means bringing presence into your everyday life. Whether you're washing dishes, walking to work, or talking to a friend, try to bring your full attention to the moment. Practice mindful awareness, where you engage in what you're doing with all your senses and without judgment. Over time, these moments of presence begin to accumulate, and they create a larger shift in how you see the world. You start seeing the divine not as something far away or unreachable, but as something that is embedded in the fabric of every moment. You begin to recognize that God isn't just in the quiet moments of prayer, but in the noise of your thoughts, the energy of your emotions, and the relationships you cultivate. Another key to sustaining your connection is embracing imperfection. The system that controls consciousness often operates through guilt, shame, and the pressure to be perfect. But when you recognize that perfection is a trap that only reinforces the cycle of control, you can release it. Spiritual growth isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming more honest, more real, and more willing to be vulnerable. The divine is not interested in your performance, it is interested in your presence and willingness to be authentic. This authenticity requires you to accept your humanity, with all its flaws and struggles, because only in accepting your imperfection can you truly begin to break free from the need to prove your worth or achieve a certain state of awakened perfection. When you embrace yourself as you are, without the pressure to be better or more enlightened, you create space for the divine to enter your life in a more genuine way. The divine isn't asking you to be something other than who you are, it's asking you to be fully who you are, without hiding or pretending. To continue on the path of reconnecting with the divine, it's also important to nurture your inner guidance. The system tries to keep your attention focused outward, on what others are doing, on what you don't have, and on what you think you should be achieving. But the more you strengthen your inner connection, the easier it becomes to ignore the noise and follow your own intuition, which is deeply connected to the divine. You can nurture this inner guidance by listening to it, trusting it, and acting on it, without second-guessing. This doesn't mean ignoring logic or intuition, but it does mean trusting the quiet voice inside that knows what is truly right for you. When you make decisions from this place of inner knowing, your life begins to align more with your higher purpose, and the feeling of separation from the divine starts to dissolve. Finally, remember that consistency doesn't mean perfection, it means commitment to the path, even when you don't feel connected, or when life becomes difficult. There will be times when you feel distant, when the system feels too strong, or when the noise of the world is overwhelming. But as long as you return to the practices of presence, awareness, and self-acceptance, you are on the right path. It's in the returning that the transformation happens. With patience, practice, and persistence, the invisible system that controls your consciousness begins to lose its grip. It's not that it disappears entirely, but it no longer has the same hold on your life. You begin to see that the separation was never truly real, it was an illusion, reinforced by the layers of perception, identity, and external forces that shape your experience. And when you can see through the illusion, the divine presence that was always there becomes clearer, more tangible, and more accessible. At this point, you've learned how the system operates, how to spot your own hooks, and how to navigate the world with a clearer awareness. But now, we come to the final question: how do you move forward with this new understanding in a way that truly changes the way you live? How do you sustain the freedom, the connection, and the clarity you've gained, without falling back into the old patterns of the system? Now that you've uncovered the invisible system that controls your consciousness, understood how it works in layers, and learned how to break free from its grip, the final step is about living this newfound awareness in a way that leads to lasting transformation. The goal isn't to escape the world, but to navigate it consciously, with a deep connection to your inner truth and to the divine, while still engaging with life in a meaningful way. The first step in sustaining your freedom is creating boundaries. This doesn't mean shutting yourself off from the world, but it means being selective about what you allow into your mind, body, and spirit. Set clear boundaries around what influences your attention, whether it's social media, negative news, toxic relationships, or unhealthy habits. The more you control what enters your consciousness, the less power external forces have to control you. Boundaries give you space to nurture your inner peace, to reconnect with your true self, and to stay aligned with your higher purpose. The second step is embracing the practice of daily mindfulness. It's not enough to simply understand the system and see its influence. You must actively practice mindfulness every day. This means bringing awareness to your thoughts, actions, and reactions throughout the day. When you find yourself pulled into old patterns, notice it, breathe, and gently return to the present moment. Mindfulness doesn't mean forcing yourself to always be calm or perfectly aware. It means choosing to be present, and when you slip, returning to presence without judgment. This steady practice is what transforms your life, one moment at a time. The third step is staying rooted in gratitude. One of the most effective ways to maintain your connection to the divine and break free from the system's control is to cultivate gratitude in every situation. When you practice gratitude, you shift your focus from what's missing or wrong to what's already abundant in your life. Gratitude opens your heart and connects you with a sense of unity, helping you feel less isolated, and more aligned with the divine. It reminds you that even in times of struggle, the divine is always present, guiding you through each moment. Make gratitude a daily practice, whether through journaling, prayer, or simply pausing to acknowledge the good in your life. The fourth step is taking inspired action. When you are no longer controlled by the system, you begin to act from a place of clarity and purpose, rather than fear, comparison, or the need to prove yourself. Inspired action doesn't come from pushing or forcing, it comes from a sense of alignment with your true self and the divine. When you start making decisions from a place of inner truth, you stop reacting to life, and instead, you create it. Trust your intuition, take steps toward your goals, and act with confidence, knowing that you are supported by the universe. Finally, the most important step is maintaining compassion for yourself and others. Remember that this process isn't about achieving perfection or living without struggle. Life is still full of challenges, and you will occasionally fall into old patterns. But the key is gentle return, not self-criticism. When you notice yourself slipping back into old ways of thinking, feel compassion for yourself, because you're human. Likewise, offer compassion to others who are still caught in the system. We're all navigating the same invisible forces, and compassion helps dissolve the barriers of separation that the system builds between us. To sum it all up, living consciously in the world without being controlled by it is a continuous practice of awareness, presence, and self-compassion. It's about learning to navigate the world from a place of clarity, making choices that align with your true purpose, and remembering the divine that's always been present in every moment. Now, I want to leave you with a final thought. How can you, today, choose to live from a deeper place of awareness, free from the invisible system, and fully connected to the divine that is always within you? Think about how you can integrate these practices into your life in a way that feels natural, so the system no longer controls you, but instead, you create a life filled with clarity, purpose, and divine connection. And if you found this video helpful and want more content that guides you to live consciously and break free from the system, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This journey of awareness is ongoing, and together we can continue to explore how to live a life of true freedom and connection.